So what we have covered in our previous presentation of Hello World refactoring is a little bit of taste. We got a little bit of taste on the dependency injection and the XML file configuration and annotations of those things. We haven't really looked into dependency injection in detail, so that's what we are going to do here in this presentation. So what is and why dependency injection? We'll talk about the motivation of those dependency injection. We got the, again, taste of why dependency injection is useful in our previous Hello World refactoring presentation. There are two dependency injection variants. Again, we cover this one as well: setter based or constructor based. We'll talk about reading configuration. So configuration could be either in a form of XML file and or Java configuration file. So then we're going to talk about the bean configuration. So here we are going to use either XML or the bean configuration, bean annotation to configure each bean. Bean parameter types. And then we'll talk about the auto wiring, auto scanning one more time in detail. So this is the segment of this presentation. You are going to have ample opportunity to play around. I'll give you enough time to do that. Okay. The last topic is bean naming. So what is and why dependency injection? So dependency injection sometimes is called the inversion of control, and technically they are slightly different, but for the sake of our the understanding of what the dependency injection is all about, you can think of it as the same thing. So sometimes we call dependency injection, sometimes we call inversion of control, and then we use the term dependency injection container or inversion of control IOC container. So those are those two terms are changed interchangeably, at least in this code camp. It is based on what is called the Hollywood principle. So any aspiring actors or actresses, they go to Hollywood, and the first thing they encounter is this "don't call me, I'll call you" Hollywood principle. So in this case, dependency injection container is the agent, okay, and your components are the actors or actresses. Okay, so dependency injection container resolves dependencies of components by wiring and injecting dependency object. So basically, by specifying your beans and dependency injection requirements among those beans, either in XML file or Java configuration, you're basically asking dependency injection container to perform the bean creation and injection of those dependency objects. So it is in fact a push model rather than pull model. So if you're not using dependency injection, you have to be responsible for searching for all the reference object, meaning dependency object. You have to perform lookup operation, and then you have to set the property of your field with those dependency object you searched for and found. Okay, so DI or IOC, these are terms coined by Martin Fowler, pretty famous guy in software field. So why you want to use dependency injection? So one big reason of using dependency injection is testability. So basically, by using dependency injection, you make your code to be POJA, meaning your classes are in the form of POJAs. So target components are testable as POJAs. So during testing, dependency objects are mock objects that are provided by testing framework. But in production environment, those dependency objects are real object provided by, again, surrounding environment. That surrounding environment could be a real container. Okay, so your code doesn't care, whether those dependency objects are provided by testing framework or real container environment. Okay, so if you're testing your code, basically you get those dependency objects in the form of mock objects. So it's a lot easier to test by having your target components in the form of POJAs, and by using dependency injection, you make your code to be POJAs. And target components are more usable, reusable, and maintainable because there is no need to have a lookup code in your target component. So you don't have to search for your dependency object yourself. Instead, it will be set for you. Okay, it will be given to you. Okay, so your code is in fact a lot simpler, and again, that's the reason your code is a POJA rather than non-POJA, where you have a dependency on other classes or interfaces, or perform some search logic based on some kind of infrastructure and things like that. It allows reuse in different application environment by changing configuration file instead of code. So basically, you know, the everything is going to be in a form of configuration. I should say the things are configurable so that your POJO business logic will stay in a form of POJOs. Okay, so those are the reasons why dependency injection is in fact useful. Again, dependency injection is everywhere. You know, all modern frameworks support dependency injection as their core feature. Okay, so Spring Framework obviously is not an exception. Of course, Spring Framework is the one that popularized this dependency injection into application development. Now even Java has a dependency injection, the standard, which is called the CDI. Okay, DI configuration. So basically, the container, dependency injection container, gets its instruction on what objects to instantiate and how to configure and how the dependency injections are done. So injection requirements and how to, you know, basically the end result is going to be assembly of all these beans. So all these things are supposed to be specified in your configuration, and dependency injection container will basically read the configuration, will perform all these things: instantiation and configure and injection. Okay. So this configuration metadata is specified in a form of XML or Java configuration. So we have seen examples of this in our previous presentation. Okay, so the way things work is that you know, you specify this configuration metadata in a form of XML or Java configuration to the Spring container, meaning dependency injection container, and then you have a business objects. Those are POJO classes. Okay, so once Spring container, dependency injection container, reads a configuration file, okay, it will search for those classes in your class path, and it will perform instantiation of those objects. Okay, and then it will perform the dependency injection. So two key aspects for now you can focus on is instantiation of the beans, and then injection of the beans to target components. Those are two different things. Okay, so instantiation, you specify the bean element in XML file, and the dependency injection, you know, you specify the property or constructor arg. Okay, in XML file, but if you're using the annotation, you can use AutoWide for specifying dependency injection. Okay, so again, we'll talk about those things in a bit more detail. Okay, so the final assembly is basically represented by what is called the context object. So context object is basically a registration of all the beans that have been created, and those beans are wired already for you. Okay, so once a particular context object is created for your application, then you can, you know, ask the context object to give a bean instance, and then you can do whatever you want. Okay. Okay, so there are two dependency injection variants, as we talked about, either constructor dependency injection or setter dependency injection. Okay, so in a constructor dependency injection, dependencies are injected through the constructor of target component. Setter dependency injection is done through the setter method of the target component. Okay, so again, we have seen examples of this one already in our previous presentation, right? Okay, so this is an example of constructor dependency injection. So suppose we have a target component called the constructor injection class. Okay, it has a dependency field called the dependency. Okay, and the DP, that's the field name, and the dependency object type is dependency. So it's getting dependency object through the constructor method, constructor injection. So that has to be the same name of the class, right? Okay, so this is a constructor dependency injection. Setter dependency injection is using setter method in a target class. So we have a setter method, set my this is my mistake. It should be set dependency. There should not be any my. Okay, so set dependency, and then it should actually have a dependency object as an argument. Then it will set this guy. Okay, so my mistake on this my thing. Okay, so reading configuration. So once dependency injection container, DI container, reads configuration file, either XML file or Java configuration, okay, it will create an object that contains a registration of all those beans and their wiring requirement, meaning dependency injection requirement. Those are represented that is actually represented by bean factory interface. This is the root interface for this Spring Bean container. So when I say Spring Bean container, I'm talking about, you know, all the beans and their dependencies. Okay. Typically, you are going to use the application context object, which is the sub-interface of Bean Factory, and application context actually adds more, semantical features. Like it does have AOP features, event publication, application layer context, and things like that. So typically, instead of using Bean Factory interface, we are going to use the application context interface to reference, to make a reference to the Bean registration or dependency injection container. Okay, so there are three different ways you can read the configuration files. So you can read the XML configuration file, you can read Java configuration file, and with the Spring Boot, you can read Java configuration file with the Spring Boot class. So we're going to take a look at each of these schemes in a bit more detail. So scheme number 1. So in this case, the configuration is specified in XML file. So in this case, that XML file is named as a beans.xml file. Okay. So you are going to use a class called the class path XML application context. So this class is used to search for your class path. So as long as this beans.xml file is in your class path, okay, it will find it, and then it will read the configuration file. Then it will instantiate all the beans that are declared, and then it will perform dependency injection among those beans. So by the time you're done with this line of code, you get this context object, which is a type of either bean factory or application context. And then from the context object, you call getBean method, and you specify the name of the bean. Okay, so if person bean is specified in beans.xml file, then you should be able to get that bean, and then you can actually use whatever methods of that bean object. Okay, so I can call getName method of the person object. So this is reading XML configuration file using class path XML configuration, class path XML application context class. This is using Java configuration rather than XML. So in that case, you basically say this main, so in this case, main application is a configuration file, but we don't actually specify any configuration here. Instead, we are importing bean configuration in the bean configuration.class. So in this case, we assume bean configuration.java contains all the bean declarations and dependency injection, the requirement declaration. Okay, and then basically you specify the name of the root configuration file. So because main application is a root configuration file, you specify the class object of main application.class file. So this is the same thing as this. Okay, the only difference is that in this case, bean declarations and dependency injections are specified in the XML file. In this case, those bean declarations and dependency injections are specified, in this case, bean configuration.java class. Okay, and then rest of the code is the same, and you still get application context object. Okay. All right, now the third scheme is using Spring application class. So you can see Spring application class is from a boot, the Spring framework, org Spring framework.boot. Okay, so this is actually working exactly the same. So basically Spring application.run, and you specify the name of the configuration file. Okay, so it works exactly the same as this guy. Okay, so you can, so Spring application run performs this guy, and in addition it does perform few other things. But as far as reading configuration file and then instantiation of the beans and then dependency injection, the requirements, those things are the same thing between this guy and this guy. So you can think of, when you call Spring application.run, one of the things it does is in fact performing this guy. Is that clear? Question? Okay, so let's move forward. So let's talk about the how we can configure things. So we already have exposure to this. So the term bean is used to refer any component managed by application context or bean factory object. Okay. So in Spring, the beans are basically Java beans. So it doesn't have any no arg constructor should be there. Okay. So I should say no arg constructor should be present. Okay. And then the properties should have a getter and setter method. Okay. And the properties of beans may be simple values or more likely references to other beans. Okay, so when it have a references to other beans, that means that the bean has a dependency on another bean. Okay, beans can have a multiple names. So if you're using ID, that is the name of the bean, but you could actually specify other names as well. So that bean can be referenced by using in multiple names. Okay, so we're going to actually talk about these things in a bit more detail moving forward. So let's talk about how you can configure this bean in XML first, and then we're going to see how we can configure this bean in Java. So if you're using XML configuration, you're going to use a bean tag on the beans tag. Okay, and the ID attribute is used to give a bean the default name, and the class attribute specify the type of the bean. So basically that's a Java class path. Java class. Okay, including the full package. So let's see an example. So this is example we have seen in our Hello World application, right? So here we have defined two bean. One is called renderer and the other one is a provider. By having the property, we also specify the dependency requirement. Okay, so your configuration has to have two things. This is something I'm going to actually emphasize over and over. You have to configure each bean, okay, by using bean element. Then you have to configure dependency requirement. That dependency requirement is specified in this case property element. Okay, so in Spring application, those two things are two different things. Bean declaration is for bean creation, meaning instantiation of that bean. The second thing is dependency injection requirements. Those are two different things. Is that clear? All right. So if you have property field here, then this target class, in this case standard out message renderer, should have a setter method. Okay, because dependency injection container will use the setter method of this target component standard out message provide renderer class to set this property. Okay, so this class should have a setter method, and so the name of the dependency here is actually used is set by ref element, the attribute. Okay, so this is the same configuration file we have seen in our previous presentation. Okay, moving forward. So target component must provide setter method, as I said. Okay, so in this case standard out message renderer class should have a setter method. If there is no setter method, this is something I'm going to actually ask you guys to play around. If this guy doesn't have a setter method, then this property cannot be set by the dependency injection container, and you will experience an exception. Okay. Okay, if you're using constructor method instead of a setter method, then here you are going to specify constructor arg, the sub element, and then you still have to provide the ref attribute. So in this case, this target component should provide the constructor method. So if you don't provide the constructor method of this guy, then dependency injection container has no way of setting no way calling of the constructor method of this guy. Okay. All right. Question from Vihan. So component and ROI go hand in hand. Yeah. Let's actually hold off that question later, because we haven't talked about those annotation yet. Okay. We'll actually talk about it in a few minutes. So let's just move on because we're gonna get to that soon. Okay, DI parameter types. So the parameter types could be simple values. Typically they are beans, or it could be collections. Okay, so examples we have seen so far is the beans, meaning the dependency objects are in a form of beans. Okay, but your target component could have properties to be set with the simple values. Okay, all right, so you can use these types for both the setter and constructor injections. So let's see an example of the first one. So in this case, we declare a single bean. So dependency injection container, Spring Framework DI container will create a bean called inject simple with this class, inject simple class, and it has 4 properties, right? So in this case, the properties are not referencing another bean. Instead, it has values. So this property will be set with a John Smith. This property called age will be set with a 35, and height will be set 1.78, and this is set with a true. Okay, so typically simple values are used when your properties are the type of like a simple values like a string or int or long and things like that. Okay, second, so this is the XML version of the simple value configuration. If you want to use a Java configuration, okay, so your Java configuration class should have configuration annotation, and then each bean should be annotated with a bean annotation. Okay, and so it will create a person object, and the name of this method doesn't matter. Okay, and the return type has to be person, and here we created a person object, and we call the setter method of this person class, and then we return person. So this is exactly the same as this guy. Okay, all right, moving forward. Okay, so I'm gonna actually let you guys do exercise 1, because let's do exercise read the documentation and STS basics. And so exercise 1, first of all, you do import sample projects. So I've done that already, so I'm going to, let's see, so I have created Spring 4 DI Basics Java working set, and then I have imported the sample project. Okay, all right, and exercise 1 is bean creation. So here there is a DI basic simple value. So DI basics simple value, this is the project. Okay, all right, so you're gonna just run the application first to see the result. Java application, and this is the main, and okay, so this is the values that get printed out. Okay, so if you take a look at the code, this is the result. And you can take a look at the code. So if you take a look at the main application here, we are using configuration and the bean configuration, and so this is a case that we are using Spring Boot case. So if you take a look at the bean configuration here, we have created a person object, and we have performed the setter method. Okay, and so that is the configuration file. And the main application is importing this bean configuration file, and main class doesn't have any bean declaration like this. Okay, but this is the root configuration, because it imports all the bean configuration. In fact, you can import multiple bean configuration class file. Well, you can even import XML file here if you want to. Okay, and then you basically created the application context object that represent dependency injection container, all the registration of the beans and dependency injection. So we can call the we get the person object. Okay, so you call, so in the case of the Java, you call the get bean method rather than the same thing, get bean method. Here you specify the class object rather than the name of the bean. Okay, and you get the person object, and you can use that person object in any way you want. So in this case, we are just passing person object to display the name and value, name and height and all that stuff. So that is the things. The person class is just a Java class, and so this is the one. Okay, and so that is the same thing as this guy. Okay, XML version of it. Okay, so that is in fact the XML version of the if you go to sample.xml file directory, those are XML version of the same application. So since XML is actually the fading out as the way of configuring, we are gonna mostly use the Java configuration moving forward. Okay, so basically I'm gonna ask you guys to make one change, so add name, age, height, and each programmer. So I want you to add let's a hobby field, okay, to the person. So for now add like a hobby string hobby field to the person, and I want you to configure that value and then just display that information. Okay, I'm gonna give you guys 5 minutes to do this exercise. Okay, so we just learned how to declare beans and how to set the properties of those beans. I'm sorry, we declare beans and how to set properties of those beans using the simple values. More likely, you are going to inject bean into those properties, okay? Because typically the properties are referencing other beans, okay? So in this case, use when you need inject. When you need to inject one bean into the other. So that is the example we have seen so far the most. And declare both the beans first in the configuration file. So as I said, you have to do two things. One is a declaration of the beans. So that is indication to the dependency injection container to instantiate those beans. And then you have to declare dependency injection requirement using ref tag and with the target beans property or constructor arg. Okay, so this is again the similar example we have seen in our hello world example. So we have declared two beans. One is called the person, the other one is the address. Okay, so here we are injecting this address bean into a person bean. Okay, so again we are doing two things: declaration of the beans first, okay, using this bean element. So that indicates the DI container to instantiate each of those beans. And then we also specify dependency injection requirement by using property or constructor arg. Again, this is the XML version of it. Now, if you're using Java, this is the way that you can specify that dependency injection requirement. So again, you're going to specify each of those bean using bean declaration in the configuration file. So basically, you are saying that I want to create an object of address and I want to create an object of person. However, address object is a dependency in person class. So we are going to use a setter method of person object. So we create a person object and then we call the setter method with the result of calling this get address object. Okay, so this is the same thing as this guy. Okay. You might actually take it might take a little while for you to get used to the Java configuration, but once you get the hang of it, it's as easy as actually as easy as XML file, and both cases is pretty straightforward. Okay, so this is the same thing as this. Okay, all right, so let's take a look at exercise 2 and 3. All right, so exercise 2 and 3. So here we have this is the person class, okay, and this is the this is the bean creation. Okay, so here we are so in this case we have just a person class. Okay, so we have a person and then we have so we define just a person bean. Okay, and that's the same thing as this guy, right? And now in exercise 3, we are going to add the dependency injection to the person class. So, I actually divided the exercise to 2 and 3 to show the difference. Okay, so here in exercise 3, we are going to add address as a dependency. So if you take a look at the person, now we have address field, which is a property of address, the type. Okay, so we have a get and setter method. Okay, and then address is just basically street name, street, city and county and things like that. And then configuration. So this is the bean configuration of address, and this is the bean configuration of the person. And then we are setting the address property of the person with the address object. So we are calling this get address method to get the new address object. Okay, and basically we are just setting it. Okay, so in this case you could actually call the new address. Okay, so that's basically the same. You can just have, instead of calling get address, you can probably provide this new address right here as well. Okay, all right, and that is the same thing as this guy. Okay, all right, so I'm going to give you guys 5 minutes to do exercise 2 and 3. So exercise 2 is basically with a single bean, and exercise 3 is now you're adding a dependency of address into person, the class. Okay, again, you can create the hobby class that contains the actual hobby and how many years you have that hobby, and then you can have the dependency of hobby into the person, so that if you have time, try to do that exercise. Okay, we are going to cover auto wiring and auto scanning one more time in a bit more detail. So here I'm going to give you guys ample opportunity to play around. We have lots of questions on auto wiring and auto scanning in our previous presentation, for good reason, because it's a new features, and we haven't really spent that much time, enough time to understand these two. Okay, auto-wired. So it can be used in XML, it can be used in the Java source code for specifying dependency injection requirement. So instead of using property or constructor arg element in your XML configuration file, you can use auto-wired in the Java code directly to specify your auto-wired dependency injection requirement. Okay. Now, the places where you can use auto-wired could be fields, it could be setter method, it could be constructor method, it could be even arbitrary method. So let's talk about each of these in a bit more detail. So so that's auto-wiring. Okay. Now auto scanning. So you can specify auto scanning in XML or in Java configuration. So as I said before, auto wiring is for dependency injection requirements specification. Auto scanning is for bean creation. Okay, so if you do not want to specify the bean declaration in XML file, you can specify auto scan. So you can specify component scan, and then you provide a base package. Okay, so in this case you don't have to have a bean the bean declaration of address anymore, because in this case we have address class with component annotation. By the way, the target component that need to be searched need to have a component annotation. So in this case we have so this is the way that you specify in XML. By the way, in this case, if the person class has not been annotated with component, then you still have to declare an XML file. So in this case, the address class is annotated with the component, so that it will be detected. However, for person class, if it is not annotated with component annotation, then you can declare in XML file. Now, if you want to use a Java configuration, basically you specify component scan. Okay. Now, if you don't specify, you can specify the base package here as well. However, if you don't specify, then it will start from the package this application is this application belongs to. In this case, this class belongs to, meaning main application class belongs to. Okay. Okay, so let's take a look at exercise 5 and 6. Okay, so here I'm going to give you guys enough time to play around it. So auto wiring, in this case, we are going to have auto wire. So here, in the person class, we want auto wire address object by using auto wired. Okay, because we are auto wiring address object, we don't have to have a setter method for address field. Okay, and then bean configuration, basically we just create the person object And that's the only thing that you need to do. You don't have to call the setter method anymore, because the address will be auto configured, auto set by this annotation. Okay. And if you're using XML configuration file, basically, the only thing you have to do is basically declaration of the beans. So person bean and address bean. However, you don't have to configure the dependency injection anymore, because that is configured. So as I said before, the difference between the auto-wired versus the component scanning is that they are addressing two different needs. So as I said before, in your configuration, you have to specify all the beans. Okay, otherwise the bean will not be created. And then you have to specify the dependency injection. Okay, so that dependency injection can be specified either in XML with a property or constructor arg element, or auto-wired like this. Okay, so auto-wired is for dependency injection requirement specification. Okay, and now component scanning is, the auto scanning is for finding beans and then create instances of those. Okay, so in this case, we basically said component scan. So we are basically searching for all the beans in the classes under the package that this main application belongs to. So for now, we have a component scan. Now each target should have annotation of components. So that is indication that I want to be found and instantiated. So for the address class, that will be the case. It will be found and instantiated. However, in the person class, person class also have a component. Okay, so the person class will be found and registered. Okay, all right. So in this case, I'm gonna actually let you do some exercises. So let me actually show you. So here we have the exercise. This is the auto wire. So this is the auto wire. Let's actually run it to make sure it is running. Run as, and the Java application and the main application, and so it runs fine. So if you take a look at the code, so we don't have any XML file. So address is address, and then person. They don't specify anything, the bean declaration. So we still need to declare those beans in the bean configuration file. So that's the reason we still have to have these two. Okay. However, because auto-wired handles the dependency injection, so we don't have to have the setter method anymore. Okay. And the person class do not need to have the setter method. Okay. But you still have to have this bean configuration, because the only thing that was handled by auto-wired is the dependency injection. The bean creation, bean detection and creation are still not done by auto-wired, right? So you still need to configure this bean. So if you don't specify this, let's say if you just comment these guys out, okay, and then if you run it, you will experience an exception. Okay, I want you to take a look at what exception it is. Okay, it will be an exception. Let's take a look at the what exception it says. So here it will say no qualified bean of type of this. So it was looking for person, the class, but couldn't find it. Okay, because the person class has not been instantiated. Okay, so let's actually have this guy to be instantiated. Okay, but the address is still not been instantiated. So now if you run it, we'll still have an exception. In this case, exception is it will say it doesn't find the address, field. So it doesn't find, so it doesn't find this address, could not auto-wire field of address. So we are trying to auto-wire this address field, but there is no address class configured, meaning there is no instance of the address object. So that's the reason you complain and could not do that. Okay, all right. So that is so now if you declare this bean, then now it should be able to create both. Okay, now if you now let's actually remove in the person class, let's say you do not actually perform the auto-wiration. What that means is that so yes, let's just remove just auto-wired annotation. So if you do not have auto-white annotation and you don't have a setter method, then there is no way for the dependency injection container to set the address field. So now let's run it. So in this case, you will have an exception that it doesn't know how to, set the property. So basically, in this case, as a null pointer. So get the reason it gets the null pointer exception is because it's trying to use the address field, but address field is null. It returns null because address field has not been set. Okay. The reason is because in the person class, we have the comment.autofired, and we don't even have a setter method. So if you want to actually use the setter method, that's fine. Let's say it's a setter method. Okay. And so we just want to have this guy to uncomment. Oops. Yeah, I'm going to just uncomment, and then I'm going to have this guy to comment. Okay, so we have a setter method, okay, and let's see whether it works. And we still have that problem. The reason is because even if you have a setter method, we have not configured it. So if you actually go to the bin configuration here, okay, we did not call the setter method for configuration. That's the reason it still did not set. Okay, so now if you just comment this out, uncomment, then run it, then it should work fine. Okay, so the key point in this exercise 5 is that auto-white is for dependency injection. Okay, and the bean configuration is for bean creation and registration. Okay, so those are two different things. Bean creation is different thing from dependency injection, requirement. Okay, all right, so that is the auto-wired. Now let's actually try the auto scan. So auto scan here, we don't even want to specify these beans. Okay, oops. So if you take a look at the main configuration here, we don't even have, we are not specifying any configuration file. There is in fact a no bean configuration file anymore, because in bean configuration, we're gonna actually comment these two things out, and there is nothing to configure. So in our case, there is no bean configuration, the Java file needed. So only thing basically we need is the configuration and then component scan. So it was scanned from the package that this main application belongs to. So that is basically this package. Okay, so that package contains the address and person class. So those will be found and instantiated. Okay, so if you actually comment out this component for person, okay, then we'll have a problem. So let's actually run this guy. So it will probably say the person object is not found because we comment this out. Okay, so if you take a look at this, it will say, yeah, so there is no such bean definition exception. So that is basically person class. So com JPassion.di person is not, no qualifying bean of this type is defined. Okay, meaning dependency injection container could not find an object of this type because that has not been registered. Okay, so so that's the problem. So we're gonna uncomment, and you are gonna actually experience the same problem of in the address. Okay, so if you do this, you'll actually experience the same problem. It will say the address is not found, or it probably have a null pointer exception. Okay, so oops. So we just uncomment. So now, if you actually uncomment this address, okay, then you can actually have a configuration of this address. Okay, so you could actually have this kind of things. So I'm going to just have this bean declarations in the main configuration.java file. So here we are going to configure address. So by having this address to be declared with a bean, this address object will be the created. Okay, so even though we set the address to be we just comment this out, the component, because we configured this guy using bean declaration, it should work fine, because address object gets created with this declaration, and person gets created with this component declaration. So if you run this guy, it should work. Okay, so that worked. Okay, so I'm gonna let you guys to play around what I just did, in the same way I did, play around the you can certainly create the XML file if you want to, but because XML file is discouraged to be used anymore, just play around with the Java configuration if you can. Okay, all right, so last topic is bean naming. So each bean must have at least one name that is unique within the containing bean factory or application context object. Okay, so in a single Spring framework dependency injection container, every bean should have a different name. Okay, that makes sense, right? Okay. So how does a name is assigned to a bean? So if a bean has ID attribute, the name of the ID attribute is the name. Okay. If there is no ID attribute, then Spring will use a name attribute. If there is no ID and if there is no name attribute, then Spring will use the class name as the name of the bean. Okay. A bean can have, in fact, multiple names. So basically, you can specify multiple names by using comma or semicolon. Okay, so let's see an example. So this is an example where you can specify the names of the bean in XML. So the first example is the one that we have seen so far. So in this case, name of the bean in this case is the name of the value of ID. Okay, if ID attribute is present. The second example is that ID attribute is not present, so it will use a name attribute as the name of the bean. The third case is that this bean declaration doesn't have an ID and doesn't have a name attribute. In this case, the value of the class will be name of the bean. So in this case, name of the bean is going to be com.jpassion.di person. That is going to be the name of the bean. Okay. The last example is you can give a multiple names. Okay. So here, this bean can be referenced with a name 1, name 2, name 3, and name 4. Okay. Now this is the case in XML, but if you're using Java, basically, the name of the bean is basically the name of the class. Okay, it's like a person. However, you can give a name. So here I give a name of name 1, name 2, name 3, name 4. So these are the names given to this bean. Okay. Okay, so exercise 7 is basically exercising the bean naming. So let's take a look at the lab documentation. Oops. Where is the all right, so let's just run the bean naming exercise here. So there's nothing complicated. So bean naming. So if you take a look at the bean configuration file, okay, so we give name 1, name 2, name 3, and name 4 to the name of the bean. Okay, if you don't specify any of this guy, the name of the bean is going to be person with the small p. Okay, so this is the bean configuration, and in the main application file, we import that configuration file. Okay, and then we can access the bean by providing the class object. Okay. So that's one way to get the reference to a person object, or we can use the name 1, name 2, name 3, and name 4 as a name. And you can see all these guys are in fact the same. So if you run this code, they all should actually return true. Okay, and in fact, we can actually find out the aliases of this guy, by running it. The get aliases method for the context object, you provide the name 1, then it will give you name 2, name 3, and name 4. So let's run this guy. Basics naming and Java application and main application and OK, and then it should actually return true, 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 and then alias is going to be name 4, name 3, and name 2. If I run it with name 2, then it will give you alias is going to be name 1, name 3, and name 4, something like this. Okay, it's pretty straightforward. Okay, so I'll give you guys 2 minutes to do this exercise.